When the hush falls, it's time to call this meeting to order. September 20th meeting of the SBCAG board, and would you call the roll, Ms. Contreras?
Thank you. Director Williams? Here. Wolf? Adam?
Here.
Lavanino?
Here.
Richardson?
Here.
Lizaldi?
Here.
Mosby?
Here.
Bennett?
Here.
Clark?
Here.
Murillo?
Here.
Patino?
Here.
Sierra?
Here.
And Chair Hartman.
Here. Please stand for the pledge. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Contreras, do we have any public comment slips for matters not on today's agenda?
We have no public comment.
Okay. Are there any items that any board members would like to pull from the consent calendar? 4B we have to because Supervisor or Director Williams has to recuse himself on that. Any others? And anything in North County? And anything from the public?
No. Nothing from the public.
Okay, well, let's read 4B into the record, and we'll have Supervisor Williams recuse himself. We'll vote on that. We'll come back and vote on the balance of the agenda.
4B, Highway 101 HOV, Contract Amendment for Galvin Preservation Association. Approve and authorize the chair to execute Amendment Number 2 to the agreement with Galvin Preservation Association to continue providing environmental support and coastal permitting services for the Highway 101 HOV project, to extend the period of performance for a year, and to increase funding by $160,000 for a total not to exceed amount of $410,000 with a period of performance through June 30th, 2020. 4B1. Approve and authorize the Executive Director to execute task orders pursuant to Exhibit A, Scope of Services. And 4B2, approve and authorize the Executive Director to extend the period of performance for up to one additional year in accordance with Section 4B.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve?
I move the staff recommendation.
Is there a second? Is there any further discussion? And we have no public comment. And so we need a roll call vote because we're in two different locations.
Director Wolf?
I heard what was going on. Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Lavanino?
Aye.
Richardson?
Aye.
Lizaldi?
Aye.
Mosby? Aye. Bennett?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Murillo?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Sierra?
Aye.
And Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes 12-0.
Thank you. And now may I have a motion for to approve the balance of the administrative?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second.
And any further discussion? And once again, we'll need a roll call vote.
Director Williams?
Aye.
Wolf?
Aye.
Adam?
Aye.
Lavanino?
Aye.
Richardson?
Aye.
Lizaldi?
Aye.
Mosby?
Aye.
Bennett?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Murillo?
Aye.
Patino?
Aye.
Sierra?
Aye.
And Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes 13-0.
Okay, turning to item 5 in our agenda. Would you read that into the record, Ms. Contreras?
Item 5, 2018 Measure A Strategic Plan. Receive presentation on financial memorandum to support development of 2018 Measure A Strategic Plan and provide feedback to SBCAG staff.
Director Kern.
Good morning. Good morning, board members and members of the public. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. This is our 2018 Measure A Strategic Plan update. It is in response to the SB1 funding that we recently received and the direction that we received from the board to assess what our needs are and how we proceed moving forward with our Measure A program and with the additional funding that we have. So we'll move on. Again, it's a minor update because it's still within the short-term needs. We have the 101 project, and dealing with the cash flow needs there. So once we get the 101 done, then we can look at other projects throughout the county and add to the Measure A program if there's funding available during the life of the Measure A program. So we are planning after we go through the cycle 2 of SB1, then we'll do another major update and relook at what our priorities are at that time. So we will continue to coordinate with the TTAC committee that you've established to address this issue as we go through this process. But this is basically a two-step process that I want to talk about. So the first part is the good news, right? With SB1, we have a funding plan to get us through the 101 corridor, and we went through that in detail at our June workshop with the board and the folks that attended that. So I don't necessarily need to go into major detail about that, but just a quick overview is basically A, B, and C, the phases of A, B, and C of our phase 4 of this project are 100% funded. So the plan is to apply for D&E in the next cycle, and so we have a light at the end of the tunnel to get this project done. It's pretty amazing where we've been, you know, a year ago or a year and a half ago when I first started this job. I think you guys asked me in my interview, how the heck are we going to fund this project? And I think I said, I don't know. So here we are today, and we have a funding strategy and a funding plan. So the next slide here is identifying all the funds that were identified for this project the last few months. So I'm gonna belabor this issue a little bit just to emphasize it. You know, it's really coincidental that we got $184 million of the state transportation grant competitive funds and $184 million of the SHOP. It's just coincidental that those are identical numbers. I think it's a typo every time I see it, but it's not. So it's basically $184 million times 2 for the 101 project. We also committed $24 million of our regional and state transportation improvement program dollars. Those are the funds that you have discretion over, and you put up your share of the regionally significant funds that you have available for projects like this, so we're doing our part. And we also received, again, through a competitive program, through the State Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. Did I get it? All right. Whew. I think that was my first time getting that right. $22 million for the multimodal corridor portion of this project. And then we also received $2.6 million of formula dollars through the local partnership, and that's only available to counties that have a self-help measure in place, so that the competitive, you know, those of us who are sharing that pot of money is a little smaller, but still it's rewarding those counties who have stepped up and have put measures on the ballot and passed them. So a total of $416,600,000 has been dedicated to this project to see us, again, that's A, B, and C to date. So that's the good news. The challenge, which is always, you know, you could be a positive or negative, but the challenge of that is how do we use our Measure A dollars, and how do we, the cash flow of that to match that $416 million, it puts us in a little conundrum. So we don't have enough cash in the bank to match that $416 million. And so that's basically the focus of today's meeting, is to give you an update of some of the discussions we've had with your technical staff on how to go about that. And then at the end of the meeting, I'm going to talk about a little bit about what happens if Prop 6 passes in November, and paint a picture of that, that scenario. So the last thing I want to say, what am I saying here? Oh, this is what we're going to apply for in the next cycle. And it's a big range, $100 to $150 million in the next cycle for the remaining segments of D&E. And the range is fairly large, with $50 million difference there, because we're not quite sure of how many operational improvements and pavement condition project components will be incorporated into that project yet. We're not that far enough in the design to determine the price exactly like we are in A, B, and C. So that's why the range is fairly large. But we do intend to apply for a significant portion of the SB1 funding to complete this project from Carpinteria all the way to Santa Barbara. And I think the benefits of getting that project done will be with us for, what, 100 years? We're the benefits of our communities from Carpinteria and Summerland and all those, Montecito and Santa Barbara, we're going to be benefiting from that forever. And it also is a statewide benefit for all the folks that travel to and from our county and through our county. Will be thanking God that we did something about this project and made it happen. So with that, we're going to get a little technical on you. So I hope you have your coffee ready. And I'm going to turn it over to our consultants from KNN Public Finance Consultants. Melissa Schick, right? Okay. Is going to make a presentation about some of the options that we're looking at in financing and how we move this project to reality over the next few years and some of the needs associated with that. So with that, I'm good, unless there's any questions for me. And then I'm going to come back up and give you the scenario about what will happen without SB1. So with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa. Thank you.
Good morning, board members. It's a pleasure to be here. As Margie said, my name is Melissa Schick, and I work with KNN Public Finance. Just briefly, by way of introduction, we're a municipal advisory firm, and we help public entities with planning and analysis for capital projects, as well as help with the bond issuance process. We work with a variety of different public entities, but more specific to you, we work with a number of your California Transportation Sales Tax peer agencies. So Contra Costa Transportation Agency, LA, and then a number of other entities. So just briefly, just with regard to the strategic plan update, and as Margie indicated, really the focus of the update is on the delivery of the Highway 101 project. And in that context, we evaluated the current Highway 101 project costs, and we looked at the impact of your SB1 funding on project delivery. We also looked at Measure A revenues and expectation for the revenue performance over the forecast period. And then lastly, we analyzed bond financing scenarios or financing options to ensure project delivery. So this is kind of big picture, but a cash flow model and what we've been working with staff to develop is really the primary tool to determine the feasibility of the delivery of your 101 project. On one hand, the Measure A program has really been delivered on a pay-as-you-go basis, meaning that you have sufficient Measure A revenues in cash on an annual basis to meet your pass-through, the 67% of total revenues to the jurisdictions, as well as your regional projects. But when you start to consider larger scale projects like the 101, there may be other variables necessary to deliver that. And that's what you'll see on the left-hand side, whether it's bond proceeds or other funding resources to allow for the overall program to maintain a positive cash balance and allow you to deliver your project. So as mentioned, working with staff, we've developed a very technical and detailed cash flow model that we hope to spare you some of that this morning, but just really big picture key assumptions that we've utilized. Our forecast period is a 10-year period, And with staff's direction, we've used this period just because that's the reasonable time frame for the HO1 project to be delivered. Other assumptions within the model include SB1 would not be overturned, that 67% of the total available revenues would still be passed through to the jurisdiction. We assume updated Highway 101 project costs, and then we have expectations for the Measure A revenue growth, some of which are driven by HDL, which is a sales tax consultant, and the other of which is we just reverted to a long-term average of the growth of the Measure A revenue, which is approximately 3%. So the outcome of these base case assumptions within the cash flow model results in an initial cash deficit of approximately $1.5 million in fiscal 20. That deficit continues to grow through the forecast period, and at the end of the forecast period, it's approximately $80 million in the hole. On page 6, and bear with me, it's a lot of numbers and boxes, but this is mostly to emphasize that in the peak construction period of the Highway 101 project, and the expected cost in any given year allows for, achieves cash deficits beginning in fiscal 19 or fiscal 20, and this is the detail that gets you to over the forecast period the deficit of 81 million. So just really by way of example, let's look quickly at fiscal year 2022. You have 39 million of projected Measure A revenues. 67% of that is projected to be passed through to the jurisdictions, so that's 26 million. So the balance of available revenues is 13 million, but the expected project cost for 101 in that year is 29 million. So you have that imbalance between resources and project costs.
Can I ask an obvious question in my mind?
Sure.
You show the growth rate over year over year. You show the growth rate year over year of 3.5% in the first year, 0.4%, and on and on. Why does the Measure A revenues decrease for the 0.4% increase?
Good question. So the 3.5% is your actual growth in fiscal 18. Over the fiscal 19 through fiscal 2023 forecast years, that growth expectation was provided by HDL, which is a sales tax consultant that SBCAG works with closely. I think the expectation is, that the economy has been growing over the last 7 years, and there probably is some expectation of a slowing of growth over the near term.
I would expect to see a minus sign in front of that 4.4%, but it's not there.
It's 0.4, so it's in fiscal 19, it's projected to be flat.
But the revenues are less than 17, 18. And it's a 0.4% growth.
Yes, that's because we're drawing, it's a cash balance model, so we're drawing on, it's flowing through, so you kind of have your negative cash balance that then impacts the total available in the start of the next fiscal year. So we've drawn on cash, which nets out of the total available revenue. So it's not a true year over year. It's taking into account some of the draw on cash and available revenues at the beginning of that year.
I'm not satisfied, but thank you. Because it puts into question the rest of the numbers down the chart, in my mind.
Okay.
So, thank you.
That's a good
I can certainly follow up. I mean, if it's helpful, I can follow up with some of the detail behind the summary table.
Okay, maybe you can go through and then come back to that.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. So funding options, as we just went through the base case. So potential funding options to be able to deliver the Highway 101 project within the forecast period would be to potentially borrow to accelerate your Measure A revenues, whether it's long-term bonds or interim loans. The other funding resources, it could be some of your other transportation funding resources to meet the cash flow needs. So just the next few slides, we're just going to provide an overview of the approach to utilizing bonds to meet cash deficits projected under the base case. Just a quick overview that the bonds are sized to achieve an ending cash balance of $5 million in any given year, and then that your bonds will be issued as tax-exempt bonds, and the IRS requires that proceeds from bonds be spent down in 3 years. So we've sized the bonds such that the proceeds of the bonds will be spent over a 3-year period, and then if there's need for an additional borrowing, that will be done at a later date. The issuance of sales tax bonds are secured by a pledge of all of your Measure A revenues. Debt service is taken from the top before going down to other program needs. And then the final maturity of the bonds is always considered in tandem with the term of your tax. So the term of your bonds could not extend beyond your tax, which is 2040. Just a brief depiction of how a bond issuance would be set up in the context of your Measure A revenues, and that the Measure A, the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, formerly the BOE, would capture your sales tax dollars and would direct those sales tax dollars to a bond trustee. And the bond trustee would pay principal and interest on the bond before flowing the sales tax dollars to SBCAG for use for pass-through, as well as for other regional projects. So page 10 is just to provide an overview of how the cash flows are impacted with the additional resources of bond proceeds. At the top, you'll see that in fiscal 20, approximately a $24 million bond is sized. And by inserting those additional resources into the cash flow, we achieve a positive cash flow balance of just under $5 million in fiscal 22. And so you'll see that those bonds are sized to meet cash flow needs for 3 years, and then subsequent to those 3 years, fiscal 23 to 27, when the Highway 1 expenditures are continuing to be quite high in any given year, we don't have enough Measure A resources to meet those capital needs. On slide 11, we show a second bond issuance to address the deficits in the second 5 years of the projection years. The second half of the forecast is when capital expenditures for Highway 101 are at their peak. And so in this case, it's a higher bond issuance needed to meet the cash flow deficits over the second half of the forecast period. And again, you'll see in fiscal 27 that your ending cash balance is in and around that cash balance target of $5 million. So just some observations, and perhaps it addressed Director Richardson's question as well. But this is a cash flow model, and there's a good amount of assumptions in it with regard to the performance of your revenues. And so what we've shown you in terms of an example of a bond financing scenario, that first bond may not be necessary to the extent that your revenues perform higher than projected. You'll note in those first 2 years of the forecast, the deficit is in and around $1.5 million. And there may be better, more efficient ways to address those deficits rather than issuing bonds. But it's merely, we showed that as the example of how bond proceeds can help meet some of those cash deficits. And then there may be advantages certainly to issuing a single bond. Remember that you need to be able to spend the proceeds in 3 years, but certainly the cash flow model, and depending on the performance of your revenue stream, we would work closely with staff to right size a bond issuance so that we're not issuing when we don't need to issue. The impact of potentially a delay in pushing the need for bonds out is just merely probably interest rate risk. And as you push bonds out further, the cost of borrowing and the interest rates rising is a risk just to consider.
Madam Chair, I just have one question pertaining to that. I mean, is that why you have this bond proceeds on this chart in 1920? Because our cash flow need isn't acute in 1920. We could probably muddle through 1920 through other means and wait either till 2021 or 21, 22 to issue a bond. But is it of your opinion that the interest rate will just be far superior in 1920 than in the subsequent years?
You know, we always say and advise you should have your construction needs and your cash deficit really drive your finance rather than projecting interest rates and trying to beat the market. So that's first and foremost. So then to your point, the first bond is sized to meet the 3-year period of cash need. And so you'll see in fiscal 22, the capital expenditures for the 101 project together, it leaps up to above, close to 30 million. So that bond sized in fiscal 20 is sized to meet deficits over a 3-year period. But we've talked about this with your technical committee with regard to one, if your tax performs stronger, and then 2, just strategies to address some of those smaller deficits in fiscal 20 and 21 before issuing a bond and to meet a larger scale deficit.
But I mean, if you can't tell us that there's extreme likelihood that the interest rate is much better in 1920, why wouldn't we wait and not carry, $24 million worth of bonding indebtedness for an extra year that we don't really need the money that year? I mean, we could get through with a much smaller loan and much less indebtedness. So,
no, your point is valid, and we've discussed this point with your technical committee. I think certainly interest rates are rising, and we do feel when we modeled a bond issuance in fiscal 20, we modeled current market rates with some cushion, whereas the out-year bond issuance, we used just a 5% planning rate. So there is some advantage to issuing a bond earlier, just with regard to taking interest rate off the table. But it is something, and again, that first bond was sized to meet your first 3 years of cash deficit.
Got it. Okay.
Director Lavanino?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question about the bond service. How long does it take to pay off that $100 million? Because it only goes out to 2027, but.
Sure. So each of the 2 bond scenarios that you see here have been structured so that The term of that bond is consistent with the term of your tax. So the fiscal 2020 transaction is a 20-year bond.
So we'll lose basically 20% of Measure A to bond service for the rest of Measure A by borrowing the $100 million?
I don't think it's quite, so you'll see, let's see, is it 20?
It's about $8.5 million
yeah.
a year. So somewhere
So
in,
on the
but,
first,
but
right,
that,
right.
That will
Sorry,
go,
I was looking
right.
at the first, but yes.
So that goes out for the entire length of Measure A.
That's correct.
Okay. Other question I had was, so when we go out and bond at the county, we have to go through the debt advisory committee and we kind of look at all this. Is there anything for SBCAG that you go, I don't know if there's a statewide organization that you look at that kind of evaluates
advisory?
the scenario?
Yeah.
Right.
So,
That's as far as it goes, I guess, right?
I would say a number of our sales tax clients have a citizens advisory committee that they often bring their bond financings to, but really the final approval is their board.
Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just as a follow-up to that, in our Measure A program, is this even possible? Was that something that was contemplated when we did Measure A?
Yes, absolutely.
That it could pay for bonded indebtedness?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, and we just, in the last, just in appendix, we put your expenditure plan, slide 16. Your expenditure plan gives you bonding authority. The ordinance, provides the bonding authority under your expenditure plan. So this is just a brief snapshot of what the ordinance allows for in that bonding authority.
Director Bennett.
I have a question. Is the projections on the sales tax, did you include or did our consultant include the state pool that's being created with internet purchases, which is expected to bring a sizable sales tax increase statewide? Has that been included in the projections?
That has not. My understanding, yeah.
No, because we're not receiving that tax yet, and so, yeah, that's a very good question. I think I shared that with the board a few weeks ago, that opportunity is still out there, and the state needs to take the initiative to impose those taxes on those transactions so we can get the benefit of that. So that has not happened, so that's not included in the assumption. So that could be a major increase in revenue.
I've actually seen figures that have been bantered around as to what that might ultimately be, but I think that would be helpful as well, because I certainly expect that to go forward. I don't think that's, given the decision that was made at the court level, it would seem that that's a pretty solid, they may take a while for implementation, but ultimately it will be going forward. So it would just seem that it would be nice to see, as we have here, without it, and then see what it might be like with it. And I think that would make things look just a much better scenario than what we're looking at.
Yeah, and these documents are models are working and living, and they change consistently with regard to the assumptions and actuals. So yeah, we agree. Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, I look forward to that revenue and increasing. So it may eliminate the need for 2 bonding opportunities, but it's not going to eliminate the need for at least 1. Because the cash flow needs in this time period and the requirements that we have before us in receiving these grant monies, we've committed to delivering this project in a certain time frame. So we have to step up and provide our match to pay for our share of those within a certain time frame to implement this project, as we dedicated in our grant application to the California Transportation Commission. So there's some obligations that we have to fulfill our promises.
Director Mosby.
A question about when the project was originally designed to move forward, what was the anticipated revenue stream at that time? Was it always anticipated to be bonding sometime down the road?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I guess
absolutely.
my question is too, why, granted, is it a timing thing? They were just waiting for the timing mechanism. We didn't move forward, when the project was approved, that we...
Yes.
leverage and fund?
The intent of the project was never for SBCAG and the Measure A program to fund 100%. So we always knew we would be in a position of using the Measure A as matching funds, and $140 million is how much of the Measure program? You know, it's a big chunk of it, and so there, in a certain time frame, we would not accumulate those monies enough to have that cash on hand. So it was always anticipated that we would bond at some point in time.
Yeah, I think that's important to
Yes.
let everybody know
Yes.
that this was a program that
Yes.
was designed, so it's not something new that's sprung
No,
on
it's
us now.
not.
It's an anticipated movement from a long time ago.
Correct, absolutely. And this is a strategy that most counties use in delivering their flagship projects, such as the 101 project.
But I think that should be something that should be identified, because it's looking like, well, you approved a project, and now we didn't know how to pay for it then, but now
No.
we are, but it's always been anticipated.
Yes, it's
that
always
we'd have
been
to-
anticipated to do this strategy at some point in time. But I think what's important here is we have a choice. So we can do a smaller bond and get a better interest rate and use that cash, you know, or get the money lent to us to use that cash and free up cash for continue to pass through some of our Measure A. You know, so there's choices here for the board to consider, and this is just the first taste. You know, I know it seems a little bit overwhelming, but we're going to be talking about this for the next few months and batting this around, the pros and cons of it. So this is just your first introduction to the options, and you're going to get much more details as we move forward.
Director Lavanito?
I'm not sure if
Sorry.
One other thing is there a reason why impact fees weren't assessed for peak hour trip increases on this? I mean, it seems like a lot of what we're doing here is local, expanded regionally, and the jobs housing imbalance, which we have, what, 20,000 from the south, 10,000 from the north coming here.
Yeah.
But it seems like the success of the local area is one of the reasons we're having to go this way. I mean, great that they're succeeding, but it seems like a lot of the burden should be imposed on the people who are succeeding so much.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way, but
probably a question that should have been asked in 2008 when you passed your measure to assess regional impact fees, and I'm not sure if that happened at that time. In Merced, we did have a program, regional transportation impact fee, that was actually in place before the measure was established. So, you know, some of those things, and those are one-time collection of fees when that development happened. So it's
they're assessed by the project.
Correct.
Which, I mean,
it's impossible to go backwards in time and assess a fee to a project that's already been developed.
It just makes sense that if somebody's bringing in 10,000 more people, there should have been an assessment based on that.
Correct.
And maybe the person would look more at providing the housing more locally before they built this great big business.
Yeah.
So,
you know, this board and the staff that was here before me would know if that question was asked at that time, but you know, it doesn't exist now. Yes, that's another funding mechanisms that regions have used in the past to fund that portion of the new growth share of the impacts to major facilities like 101.
Director Lavanito.
Thank you. And I did want to touch on something Director Mosby mentioned, because I think it's really important to the public, is that when we sold this measure, there always was a $250 million to $350 million hole in it. We projected that hopefully the federal government would pay for it sometime, but we really, I mean, the math never worked until we got something. Well, I think what people need to know is now we did get that, so we have to do something in response to that. But I'm hearing from people that are thinking, hey, you passed Measure A, you were supposed to build the 101, so why are we talking about any of these other things? Measure A already had a hole in it. So this, with the anticipation that we would get some federal or state money somewhere along the line. And there for a long time, we realized that wasn't going to happen, but now it has. So I think that people to remember.
Director Mosby?
maybe Director Lavanito can answer about the impact fee component and why that wasn't looked at.
I wasn't here in 2008, sorry.
Director Bennett?
I was here, and my memory is that there was no discussion in regards to such a fee that our director has spoken of.
If I was here then, no.
So back in 08, 07, when this was being formulated, I don't have any recollection of that taking place. But I will say it was very clear when we were dividing up the $1.05 billion projected, and it was projected sales tax for the future, that the amount going to the 101 was $140 million, and that was right up front. That was during the campaign when we were moving forward with the Measure A project, that $140 million, and it was always anticipated, always expected, because the estimated ultimate costs were in the neighborhood of $540 million, I believe, something like that. And I could be very off on that, but it's been a long time ago. But there was never an expectation that Measure A would pay for it all. It was always anticipated that with our partners in the federal and state side of things, that funding would come forward in order to make the project viable. And it was clearly understood that there would need bond proceeds as well, ultimately. And as I recall, in the previous measure, Measure D, we in fact did float some bond proceeds for projects to go forward of the local nature. So this is not an unusual approach to making the overall system work, and was understood very well back in 08.
Yes, Mr. Eads.
Chair Hartman, members of the board, Scott Eads. I just wanted to add to this that procedurally, there's other, the other fund matching funds that we're talking about in terms of the SB1 funds that are managed by the CTC. The expectations are that they're contributing funds and they want to see proportional expenditures. And so that's part of the reason too, is once we get ready for construction, which we're gearing up to do, those expenditures will start going out quickly, and we need to make sure that we have the SB1 dollars in the bank from the CTC, which they've given us, assuming that SB1 sticks around, and the Measure A fund. So really, we're preparing to make sure that we can proportionally expend these, and everybody has confidence that the dollars are in the right places to do so.
Okay. Madam Chairperson, members of the board, if I can continue. In the working paper, or the white paper that you have included in your packet, it showed various options and bonding opportunities. And so the staff is looking at that very closely, and will come back as we proceed with recommendations on how best they think we should proceed. But I wanted to frame a scenario for you of what our life will look like without SB1. It's not pretty. So everything I said in the beginning of this presentation, what was that, $417 million, let's just cross it out. It will not exist. And it's highly unlikely that the state will, I'm speculating, so I'm going to preface my comments with that, but it's highly unlikely that the state will do anything of this significance anytime in the near future. I think the whole legislature will have to overturn, because I don't think they'll take this issue on. And the fact that transportation, unfortunately, is not one of their top priorities. You have education, and you have housing, you have social services and whatnot. So the fact that transportation was on their agenda last year, and they were successful in passing a 2/3 majority of both houses for this purpose, and passed this measure, and we've been paying this tax since November. All the funding that has been expected to come from this program that was programmed last spring is gone. So $417 million approved by the CTC for the multimodal corridor is deleted. We also receive additional STIP dollars, State Transportation Improvement Program. This is the funding that you decide how to fund every 2 years. It will be cut from what we anticipated every 2 years under SB1 back down to the $2 million we received every year prior to SB1. So when I give presentations about SB1 and what will happen, so $2 million per year we get from our normal sources. We have maybe a couple more million if the board would decide to add our RSTP to this purpose, the Regional Surface Transportation Program dollars. We might get up to $4 million a year to maybe $5 million. But if you look at that $400 million deficit, how long is it going to take us to accumulate $400 million? where's my mental math calculator? I don't even want to do that. So it's grim. So I say over 50 years, and that's optimistic, to get us to the point where we are today just for A, B, and C. That's not including D and E. So D and E is even beyond my mathematical capabilities of figuring out how long it will take us to accumulate those funds. So if you're not depressed enough now, we'll move on to the next thing. Next slide.
So I've been trying to explain it to the public is that it could mean that the project takes an additional generation. So you're saying that is not an overstatement?
Not an overstatement at all.
Okay.
80 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Chair?
Yes.
Yes. Director Adams?
Yeah, I just want to represent all the people that don't like the tax and are planning on voting against this and voting for Prop 6 and say, it's pretty, this is a infomercial for no on 6, and I personally resent it, and we've been living beyond our means and misprioritizing things for years, and eventually those chickens come home to roost, and you're gonna live with the consequences of the things that have been done. Regardless of whose fault they are, it is what it is, and at some point we're going to have to pay the piper, and it's not going to be fun, and it's not going to be easy, but it is what it is. So I wish we'd move on and not have an infomercial for against a proposition on our meeting.
Director Williams.
I think financial issues that could affect the ability of this MPO to do the duties that the public has charged us with are fully within the purview of this meeting and should be discussed and should be known by the public. I think the public should know that we'll lose looks to me, nearly $500 million of funding, and that really could affect how long they're sitting in traffic, and I think that's important information.
Okay.
I would agree.
Permission to proceed, Madam Chair?
Director Adam, yes?
Yeah, I just want to say it's like holding a gun to everybody's head and saying now that we've screwed up and spent all the money on rainbows and unicorns, you just have to give us more money, and if you don't, you're going to sit in traffic forever. I think that's quite an incredible threat.
Thank you. I think it's a three-legged stool, local, state, and federal. And I think the state and the feds have really fallen down, and this is way too big a burden for the locals to take on by themselves. So we've made some projections. We're now seeing what the implications are, and please proceed.
Yes, so in the Measure A program and the expenditure plan that you approved prior to 2008, you projected that you would finish the 101 within the time frame of the Measure A, and I'm telling you that it could extend past what you promised in the Measure A expenditure plan that was approved by the voters. And then delivery of D&E is also way beyond the 2040 time frame of Measure A. So there are other projects that will be impacted possibly due to this change or the lack of funding from SB1. There are other projects on the list beyond 101 that this board has identified as priorities and would like to fund using Measure A dollars, and so it would be up to this board on what to do there. The local impacts to streets and roads, SB1 will not be there. So North County cities is about $2.8 million a year that they get additional with SB1, and the South counties, the South Coast cities as well as $2.3 million, the county $6.6 million. So it's the Measure A program also has a local road improvements, and basically this was supplementing that program. So the and so that those projects will not proceed. This transit, we also had some identified transit needs in our Measure A program. SB1 was assisting in funding those programs in addition to the Measure A program. So the Transit Assistance Fund is about a $1.2 million reduction annually. So state transit assistance funds, I don't know if you remember, but it fluctuates from $0 every year to maybe 400, maybe $1 million. It fluctuates based on the revenues that we received and how the state takes projects off or funding off the top, and what's ever left over gets into the state transit assistance fund. But SB1 would stabilize that fund and give us an annual, good, healthy amount annually for transit. State of good repair, again, that's for transit, that's for our transit infrastructure, so of $600,000 annually. And so there's projects at risk, capital projects at risk throughout the region. Active transportation, the Measure A program has a very active transportation segment, and we're using the Measure A dollars to leverage SB1 dollars to come into this county. Las Positas Bike Path in Santa Barbara was awarded $15 million, and it's using Measure A dollars to match that. The $15 million is anticipated to be deleted if SB1 doesn't exist. Guadalupe got $400 million from SB1, and annually it's basically doubled the grant opportunities under the active transportation program. So our Measure A dollars are just going to go so much further because of SB1, and we can just spread those Measure A dollars, those matching dollars out. So we presented all this information to the Technical Advisor Committee, and they were quite overwhelmed with all the data and information and options, and the speculation of what's going to happen in November is really an issue. So they recommended that we take a little more time to look at the options, review some scenarios for cost effectiveness and what's the best bang for our buck. I think Jim Richardson, the additional revenue, we need to look at some of those, the revenue assumptions included in the plan, the possibility of having state transactions that are out of the state accounted for in our projections. Some of those things need to be addressed, and we love to update our numbers based on the most accurate data that's available, and figure out if using some local resources such as our RSDP to eliminate the need for bonding opportunities is the best option for this region. They have yet to determine that, so they want to look at that in October and November and come back after the new year with a strategic plan that is solid of how should we move forward. And this will give us a time frame if we do have SB1 funding and we have these commitments to deliver this project. What's the timing of the bond? We have to have about at least 6 months, if not a year, prior to needing that money to go through the process of hiring a financial consultant, hiring outside legal counsel that are experts in bonding, and all those logistical, technical detail things. So the timing of that is important for our workload and understanding that, and legal counsel's workload, because they will be involved in hiring that outside counsel. So a lot of prep time needs to go into when we anticipate if we need to go out to bond, and we need about a year at least heads up to make that happen. So this delay of, we originally tended to bring the final document to you in November, but the recommendation from the subcommittee is to kick that out a few months, and I don't see any harm in doing that, but it's really up to this board. If you prefer we continue on the fast track, we'll do that, but the recommendation from the committee is to take a few months and
look at the details a little more thoroughly and come back with a strong recommendation after the new year.
Director Richardson.
Just a couple of questions. The RSTP funding.
Yes.
What projects would be impacted by use of those funds?
Currently, it's being held in reserve for the 101 project, so none.
So we'd be getting ahead of ourselves by pulling the RSTP money.
Yes, but it would require a decision of this board to make that allocation, and that the money's available for that purpose.
And then regarding those numbers of growth, that's a minus 0.4%. And it's hard for me to believe that from 3.5% to minus 4%, which is a 4% change in growth, is going to happen, with considering the economy as it is now and those sorts of things. So
okay.
that puts into question the overall impact of these numbers. A 4% change in growth negatively is not, seems impossible.
Yeah, so these are draft numbers, so we'll take a closer look at that specific number and making sure that we correct that.
And then regarding SB1, I don't know why we should suffer the sins of our forefathers. You know, the spending of the money for highway rehabilitation and bridge and stuff being taken out into other projects is being covered by a constitutional amendment to the state constitution. Transportation fundings will be spent for transportation from this day forward. And I'm sorry that our forefathers have wasted the money they did, but that happened. So what are we going to do to recover from that except try to rebuild our roads with SB1? So.
Thank you. So this is an informational item. Do we have any more questions for Ms. Scheck or Director Kern from the board? Okay, do we have any public comment slips on this item?
We have no public comment.
No public comment?
No public comment.
All right, seeing no more lights up here, we'll turn to item 6. Would you read that into the record?
Item 6, Proposition 6, adopt Resolution 1826 regarding Proposition 6.
All right, and Ms. Kern.
Madam Chair, per your request, I've put a resolution on the agenda for the consideration of the board. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, we've had some discussion. Is there any further discussion? Director Mosby.
I think some of the information is not all in here, and I think it's important to understand that SB1 is a regressive tax. It's approximately $500 to $700 per family of 4 a year, and in my community, my per capita incomes are actually down $600 in the last 10 years, not counting inflation. It's very difficult to swallow. Nothing on the SBCAG staff here. I think you guys are fabulous. I would actually, you won't hardly ever hear this, I would support another measure like Measure A, where we control our money more directly. But SB1 will take somewhere between $50 and $70 million a year out of the county. And while in a little bit we will see a nice chunk come to the county, but eventually that'll all be sucked down to Sacramento and other pet projects. I really do believe that the other side is not truly represented here telling the whole story about this, and I wish there was more public comment.
Director Lavanino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we took this up recently, Tuesday, on the Board of Supervisors, and I abstained. But today I wear a different hat. I think you're on, we're all on this, and kind of have to take our supervisor, or county, city council, or mayor's hats off and put on our transportation hats. For me, and I understand what you're saying, and that would be true, I think, if the next day, if the tax was repealed, the gas prices went down by 12 cents. But I really don't see that happening. So, I mean, to me, you know, and I'm glad this was put on the ballot. I'm going to let people make the decision. But sitting on SBCAG and approving Measure A and seeing how there was at some point a need that three-legged stool needs to have that third leg in it, on this board, wearing this hat, I'll vote to approve it.
Director Williams.
In my district, the completion of the 101 with all alacrity is not a partisan issue, and the amount of money that people are wasting in wear and tear on their vehicles, from not having enough road repair, and from lost time and productivity far outweighs the savings that would be incurred by the repeal. And so it is both to protect their pocketbook, but even more to represent my constituents who would desperately love to have a half an hour more a day with their families or at work to oppose Prop 6. And it's really a no-brainer, I think, for anybody who uses the 101 on a regular basis.
Director Murillo.
With all due respect to all the opinions expressed here today, I'd like to move that we adopt the resolution to oppose Proposition 6.
We need to go for public comment yet, but...
Very good.
Okay.
I'll hold on.
Do we have any public comment slips?
We have no public comment.
All right, back to your motion. There is a motion then by Director Murillo.
And I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion?
I would like to make a comment. Yes, of course. I know that we wear different hats here than when we sit on a council, but the city of Santa Maria has had $55 million taken away from the state. And it seems like when the state doesn't get their priorities right, then we have to pay for it at a local level. So I won't be supporting this, but I have told people, because when I was younger, I didn't want to vote for bonds or vote for measures. And now we have a measure in the city of Santa Maria, Measure U, and that's a 1-cent sales tax. And we also have a Measure Y for Allen Hancock. So we've got more measures up in Santa Maria than probably some of you in your district, and those are the ones I will be supporting. Thank you.
Okay, I just add my little bit. We have crumbling roads and bridges throughout the state. It's been huge deferred maintenance. We all travel throughout the state, and I'm supporting this measure wholeheartedly and will be campaigning for it. So let's call the roll.
Director Williams? Aye. Wolf?
Aye.
Adam?
No.
Lavanino?
Aye.
Richardson?
Aye.
Lizaldi?
Aye.
Mosby?
No.
Bennett?
Aye.
Clark?
Aye.
Murillo?
Aye.
Patino?
No.
Sierra?
Aye.
And Chair Hartman.
Aye.
Motion passes 10-3.
Okay, turning to item number 7, and that is Mr. Hart.
Madam Chair, members of the board, we have our Measure A annual report available for you. You have copies in front of you there. It is a beautiful product. I want to give particular thanks to our newest staff member, Dylan Tomlinson, who did a great job putting this together. This has been produced in-house entirely. He did all of the graphic design and worked with our other staff at SBCAG to make this a beautiful product. We're going to post this. This is a draft version. We're also going to share this with the Measure A Citizens Oversight Committee next week, get their input into it. If you have any comments or anything that you'd like to see revised or changed, we're happy to do that. And once it is a final document, we will post it on the SBCAG website and distribute it electronically so that folks can know how the Measure A dollars are being spent. This is for the 2017 fiscal year, so it's kind of a year or so in behind, but it shows the expenditures and all the various projects and the status of them in a very nice graphic, easy to read format. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them.
Who all worked on this?
Dylan Tomlinson, our staff, and Daniel Gerard, also our in-house graphic designer too. But Dylan did the vast majority of the work on this.
Well, it's just super. It makes Measure A easy to understand. Thank you.
That's exactly the intent. Thank you.
Director Bennett, did you have your light? Oh, and Director Mosby.
Yeah, a question for you on page 4.
Mm-hmm.
You have a statement about SB1, meaning for Santa Barbara County. SB1 we allocated $1,000 per county resident. Is that over the length of it, or is that a short term? Is there time on that, or you're looking, because if you do the math, what is that, 400,000 residents, $40 million a year? It doesn't seem to compute.
It's
now, initially,
the $417 million that the California Transportation Commission has allocated to the 101 project. So there's about 420,000 residents in Santa Barbara County, so that's $1,000 per person. So that doesn't reflect the ongoing benefit from Measure A. That's just a one-time, one project financial commitment from the state of California from those SB1 funds.
But we don't know what it would be 5 years from now or anything, right?
No, we could probably make that number bigger by adding in future expenditures. SB1 is in perpetuity, so it's complicated to do that math. There really isn't any way to express it. But so we thought in relationship to that grant allocation from the state, the $417 million of the 101 HOV project, that was a great way to illustrate the significant benefit to Santa Barbara County residents from SB1.
So what I'm getting at is there's a qualifier that's a time, it's a window of time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily going to be that $1,000 every year. Could be more, could be less.
Correct.
So I'm just saying as a qualifier towards the 101 HOV project might be pertinent to have there. And the other question I had is on the residents will pay on average 13 cents per day.
Mm-hmm.
Is that in fuel tax, or does that include also because there's DMV licensing that
right,
will be
that's
paying?
just the fuel tax.
Okay, so maybe a qualifier there that it's a fuel tax.
Okay.
Because it just, just stating it's not totally correct because
Mm-hmm.
more cars you got, or the newer the car, the more expensive the car.
Right.
Whether it's an electric vehicle, there are other variables in here, so.
Mm-hmm. We can look at that and make that more clear by making that distinction. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? And that is just receive and file. So are any public comment on this matter?
No public comment.
Okay, I think we're ready for our 1-minute reports. Director Murillo.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The City of Santa Barbara has adopted a Vision Zero strategy, and maybe some other jurisdictions have been lobbied for that. It's a set of strategies to eliminate fatalities, traffic fatalities. So there's an educational concept where we teach pedestrians to make eye contact with cars, make sure they stop. We're asking bicyclists to obey all the rules. And then also we might restripe some streets. And so that's the goal. We're looking to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on our streets. Very exciting, and it'll be implemented over the years, of course. And I'll send a link to SBCAG administration, and if you all want to take a look at what we're doing, very proud of that. Thank you.
Congratulations. I have a number of constituents who have shared that with me. And I have a question either for Mr. Eads or for Director Kern, and that is, when I ask about complete streets or Vision Zero, I'm often told that it's an urban strategy and not so much for rural roads. And I just would like your insights about that. For example, as we do our study in the Santa Ynez Valley of the 101, 154, and 246, are these concepts things that we can bring into that study?
Hi, Chair Hartman. Mike Becker, staff. Yes, Complete Streets is not unique just to the urban environment. Complete Streets just says that you'll plan for all users of a road as you reconstruct or do any project on it. So the rural roads don't necessarily have pedestrians on them. They may have cyclists, so you'd plan accordingly per the road or per the segment. Vision Zero changes the paradigm of transportation planning and investment from worrying about addressing congestion as the #1 issue to addressing safety. That it says that the value of life and the prevention of serious injuries is more important than congestion, and we'll align our projects with that. It's not unique, or doesn't have to apply just to an urbanized area. It's a policy that the board or city council or board of supervisors would put in place. Yes.
Would the SBCAG board ever have a role in that?
Considering SBCAG doesn't own any roads, that's probably a question we can discuss at staff or the board can discuss, but I think ultimately for it to be successful, it would have to be a local policy.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the board, my recommendation would be if your board would like to discuss that as a topic, that you just agendize it for a future meeting.
So I would like to, if it seems appropriate, so I'll defer to our director and Mr. Becker on that one. So any other 1-minute reports? Seeing none, we go to our executive director's report.
Thank you. Madam Chairperson, members of the board, Scott Eads and I had the pleasure of being the entertainment at the town hall meeting yesterday for the California Transportation Commissioners in Gonzales. Beautiful town. You missed it. You missed out on a lot. 5 commissioners attended, and it was really a great way to highlight the needs of the Central Coast and show our partnerships that we've developed up and down the highway, and I think it was very well received. So I'm really glad we did it, and I look forward to future opportunities. I'm hoping maybe next time we get them to come to Santa Barbara or Santa Maria or wherever, somewhere in our county, maybe in 5 years. So. Sarkis Kacek of our staff is unable to attend this boarding meeting, and he was really upset about that, but he is participating in a statewide leadership development program called, it's a mouthful, so bear with me, the California Academy for Regional Leaders, hosted by the California Association of Council of Governments. It's called the CARL program by CalCog. So he will be attending that on a monthly basis, a statewide program. So I'm sure that he will develop partnerships throughout our sister agencies through that program. I want to welcome back Greg Hart. He was on a 30-day tour of Europe, and we have yet to hear his stories because he just got back, and I was out yesterday, so we'll be looking forward to that, but I think he's officially a short-timer now. I also want to say that I've been making the rounds, making presentations about SB1, so if you have any speaking opportunities, I'd be happy to attend your meetings and continue that. I'd also, last but not least, like to introduce our newest employee, David Troutner. Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay, good enough. He's our new finance manager and HR generalist. He's been on board for a couple months, but this is the first board meeting he was able to attend. So I think we're complete in our staff, and we're enjoying each other, getting to know each other, and seeing their strengths and bringing it to the SBCAG and this region. So welcome, David. Thank you. And that's my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a question about the leadership training. Is that a competitive or nomination, or how does that work?
I had to nominate him for this program, and so it's about 20 or 30 folks, does anybody know, throughout the state from regions such as ours, regional agencies such as ours. So, but it's the first year, so they are the guinea pigs on this program, so there might be other opportunities as if the program continues through the CalCog leadership program. So next time I will bring that up to the board for your consideration.
So it's transportation leaders.
Correct, correct.
Terrific.
Yes. Thank you.
And Mr. Eads, thank you for being with us today.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, here for District Director Tim Gubbins today. I have a few grant-related items, and then I'll move on to some project updates. First, Caltrans is hosting, District 5 is hosting a transportation planning grant workshop. I have some flyers here that I'll provide afterwards if you're interested. The workshop will be on Friday, October 19th at the district office in San Luis Obispo. And it's going to be focusing on 3 different programs. One is a strategic partnership and transit program. It's about $4.5 million annually that's available through that grant program statewide. The other is a sustainable communities competitive program. There's about $25 million available statewide for that, and then adaptation planning, about $6 million statewide. All of these are SB1 funded grant programs that I think are ultimately allocated through the CTC. And again, I have more information here if anybody's interested. Second thing I wanted to highlight is a couple of FTA-related grants, Federal Transit Administration. The first is for nationwide program. It's about $6.3 million that's available for transit coordination, improving access to health care. The submittal for applications is on November 13th, so we have some time on that. And then there's another program which is seeking interest for transit sponsors to participate in a pilot program for expedited project delivery. It focuses on faster delivery of new transit capital projects utilizing public-private partnerships and capital projects which are operated and maintained by employees of an existing transit provider. So again, that one's due on November 13th, so please see me if you have any questions or interest in that.
Could you go back to the one about healthcare access?
Yes. Absolutely.
And describe that a little bit. And do you reach out to our local jurisdictions, or is that our job?
I don't know how much outreach we do on this, because this is a federal grant program. So we get some announcements on these, and we're passing those on. I'm not certain if our planning department or others have passed on any information to the local jurisdictions on these. So if any of you are interested, or any of your transit providers are interested, be happy to share details. Absolutely. Are you looking for more information on that one?
Yeah, could you just
absolutely.
Describe it again?
So it's called the Access and Mobility Partnership Grant Program. It focuses on transportation solutions to medical appointments and other non-emergency healthcare services. And it's specifically for folks that have limited transportation choices with healthcare needs, and making sure that they are able to get access to take care of their healthcare appointments through transportation. Okay, moving on to projects, I have several items that I wanted to highlight. One is some recent SB1 funded projects across the district. There's several of them that were funded by the CTC in August. One that I wanted to highlight specifically is a pavement preservation program. So this is through the shop, specifically to address pavement quality on Highway 1 from Solomon Road to the 166-1 junction in Santa Barbara County. It's about a $12.8 million project, and it's a couple years out. We're beginning P&ED on that, or the environmental studies phase on that, but it is a funded project now through the CTC with SB1. And I just also wanted to highlight, going back to the last few items, that the SHOP program is large, or a good portion of the SHOP program is also funded through SB1 now. So how we maintain the highway system is primarily through the SHOP program. And so that's given us a significant amount of funding to continue to fund and improve projects and deferred maintenance that we've had for many years. Another project that I wanted to highlight is up the coast in Monterey County, the Mud Creek Slide. Many of you may have heard of it. It was a massive slide that occurred in May of last year. It put about 6 million cubic yards down. It just destroyed and removed the state highway, really. It's about 50 acres of material. About one quarter of a mile of Highway 1 was just eradicated and pushed down into the ocean. So we were able to open that this summer. So we're excited that it's back open to the public. That was a huge burden for those that needed to travel up Highway 1 or have businesses up there. So we're glad that we were able to get that open. Our crews and contractor crews worked 24/7 for over a year to provide that access again. It was a massive, massive slide. Next thing that I wanted to highlight is the Pfeiffer Canyon Bridge. We've mentioned this in the past. This is again up in Big Sur, where we had a bridge go down. A slide occurred underneath the bridge and took the bridge out. And through an emergency project, we were able to replace that bridge, I think, in about 8 months' time, which was really impressive. We received a number of different awards. We just found out about another one yesterday, which the Bridges and Roads magazine has an evaluation of different bridges that are submitted, and we were identified as one of the top 10 bridges in 2018 through that. So another recognition of all the work that happened there is a pretty impressive achievement. I think that's like the 6th or the 7th or 8th award that we've received for that bridge. Moving here more locally, the Olive Mill Overcrossing Bridge replacement, some of you have seen construction activities there. That project is replacing the rail that was taken out in January with the January 9th event. So construction is underway there, and we're looking at having it fully open to traffic. It's one-way traffic now, and it will be for an extended period of time. We expect to complete that late this year. And then just a quick update on the 192 bridges. We're continuing to make good progress there. I'll run through them all quickly, just as a quick update on our latest assessment of when we expect to have these back open. First, the Montecito Creek Bridge structure, we expect to have that open at the end of January, so early next year. Utilities are driving that timeline on that in terms of being able to get that constructed. For the San Ysidro Bridge, that's where we just needed to replace the rails. We expect to have that open by mid-October. We do have access through that structure now, I think in both directions, so that one will just continue to proceed. We have access to the public already. For Amero Creek, we expect to have that open by the end of November. And then Toro Creek, we're looking at early December. It has a relationship in terms of the Toro Canyon, which is right next door, Toro Canyon Creek. So the first to go will be Toro Canyon Creek. We expect to have it open at the end of October, and then we'll start construction on Toro Creek, and we're looking at having it open early December. And then the last is Arroyo Paradon. The abutments are under construction now. The precast deck should arrive in early October, and then we expect to have it open mid-December, and then there'll be some ongoing utility work even after we have it open to the public. With that,
Dr. Lavanino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I've asked a couple different folks about this road, and it's really difficult to figure out whose jurisdiction it's in. So if somebody could check on this, and if you want to drive it, I don't recommend it, but so Mahoney, so if you're going down Betterabia, it's Black Road between Betterabia and the 1. And I think it's actually 3 different jurisdictions. I think it's some part of it's the city of Santa Maria, some parts the county, some parts the state. But that road is, as it goes in front of Tanglewood and connects to Mahoney, and as Mahoney connects at that Y to Betterabia, is probably one of the worst roads I've driven in the county. And so just kind of like to get an idea of whose jurisdiction it is, if it's on a plan to fix it, and I keep getting complaints on that one, but I'm not sure it's actually a county road. So, but I do know it has one of those weird jurisdiction crossovers there. So to all of our folks, whoever can come up with an idea by next meeting would be nice.
Okay, I'm not aware that that's a state highway. I don't believe it is, but certainly if we have any jurisdiction there, we'll look into it. Got it.
The ether. Okay, well, it's been an extraordinary year for Caltrans, and it's great to see that you're being recognized for that hard work. All right, I don't see any lights, so we're going to push on to our committee meetings. Losan.
Well, it's with great pleasure. I attended the Losan board meeting this last Monday, going down on the train and coming back on the train, and uneventful. It was a great experience, as it typically is. I'd just like to point out one item I think that's of importance, because I hear things from folks that is really not factual, and so I'd like to give you some updates on some statistics. The corridor is the second busiest corridor in the nation, and it runs with about 7.4 million riders on an annual basis. That includes the Surfliner, but it also includes Coaster and the LA Metrolink, which includes into Ventura County as well as Orange County, besides LA County. So that's a lot of folks. But for the purpose of the Pacific Surfliner, I'd like to report that we've increased the ridership by 5% for the same time period in the second quarter for the 17-18 years. So that's, I think that's pretty significant and something that we should be able to file away and be proud of. And I might add that nationwide, the Amtrak service ridership has decreased 1.5%. However, the Amtrak Coast Starlight, which goes from LA Union Station up to Seattle, has increased by 1.5%, and that's the only national rail that we've got on the West Coast. And so that's, I think, again, very exciting as to we see people using the rails here in the local area and through the state of California, Oregon, and Washington. Ticket revenue has also increased by 12% for the Pacific Surfliner, which again I think is an incredibly significant number. And we've also increased the fare box ratio now represents about 74.4% of the revenue in that second quarter. And it's been higher than that, it's been lower than that, and it does vary. That's just a picture in time. So on an annual basis, it's actually been a little bit higher than that. And then on food and beverage sales, which we listened to a lot of people about complaints with food and beverage. So we've turned that around and we've increased revenue 13.5%. And salads and the craft beers have been big hits. So, and the craft beers come from the local areas too, I might add. So we're well represented. And so that's contributed to the 13.5% on the food and beverage side for the Surfliners. So again, I think we're all very proud of that on the board of directors, and the changes our staff listens to us as well as the public, and they've been very responsive, and I think that's reflective in the statistics I've just passed on to you.
Thank you for that, Director Williams.
Well, just because one of my goals in life is to be as cool as Michael Bennett on rail, I'm just going to chime in that one of the things I hear from folks coming back on the afternoon commute train more than anything else is how much nicer it is to get home a lot sooner and to have a beer or wine on the way home instead of having to stress out and risk your life on the freeway. And then you know, since he mentioned the Coast Starlight, it is one of the most, you know, coolest experiences I've ever done is taking the train from here to Seattle, because you leave here in the afternoon, so you can be in that old school dining car as you're going through the Hollister Ranch and the Bixby Ranch, close enough to
Dangermont Preserve.
Dangermont Preserve, that's right. And then you're going to see Mount Shasta, you're going to see all these incredible things, and then you end up in downtown Seattle where you can take a ferry to anywhere around there, and it's a great experience.
What time do you wind up in Seattle, though?
Late at night, so you better get a hotel. And I would also just counsel that in general, it's a more fun experience in those cheap little sleeper cars that they have, where you have a little place to sleep.
Okay, and Director Bennett. I'm sorry, Director Richardson.
CalVans. One of the most important things that's happening at CalVans is the Executive Director, Ron Hughes, is letting us know that he's going to be retiring at the end of the year, and he's starting his transition out. Hopefully, this is his baby, CalVans. He's done a wonderful job with it in increasing van pooling and agricultural pooling with it. As a matter of fact, there's been a 39 van increase for agriculture in the last month or so. CARB, California Air Resource Board, has funded 170 new vans, and they're in the process of outfitting them for tracking and those sorts of things, and they'll be distributed out as they become available. An interesting thing is that CalVans stored their vans in Visalia at 2 different motels. And the motels decided they didn't want their vans, so they're evidently in Visalia there are 2 parking lots at the airport. The airport authority has agreed to charging CalVans $25 a parking spot per month where they can store their vans. And the agriculture vans are starting their repositioning to Yuma again this year to support the growth of agricultural product in Yuma. And we're looking forward to the next CalVans meeting. Thank you.
Okay, I think with that we've concluded our agenda, and we're ready to adjourn until Thursday, October 18th here in Santa Barbara.